Okay.
Welcome. I'm here with Dr. Amy Schaus, acupuncturist and functional medicine practitioner. And today we are going to talk about the ketogenic diet, what that is, what it means for your health. So, Amy, is there anything that you would like to say about yourself or your practice to start off?
Sure. I'm Dr. Amy Schaus, and I have a private practice in San Rafael, California called NorCal Integrative Medicine. And I do specialize in managing chronic and acute pain as well as metabolic syndrome. And I help people lose weight and feel better using ketogenic and low carb, high fat diets.
Fantastic. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the ketogenic diet, but I think there's kind of a, I don't want to say mystique, but people don't really understand it. So I thought it might be good to start with just really basically, what is a ketogenic diet?
Okay, so that's a really good question. A ketogenic diet actually was a diet that was formulated many years ago to treat epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of like this medical version of the ketogenic diet that's used for seizures, particularly in intractable seizures for young children, that was developed, I think, in the 20s or 30s. And then there's like
Mm-hmm.
the keto we hear about these days,
Right.
which is quite different, although of course it overlaps because most people aren't using it to treat uncontrolled seizures. They're using it to lose weight, get more mental clarity, have more brain health.
Mm-hmm.
So the version that we know of today is a little bit more flexible. There's a little bit more interpretation there, but the basics is that anytime your body is in a ketogenic state, burning fat instead of sugar for fuel, and you're doing that through diet, that's a version of a ketogenic diet.
Okay. All right.
And you said simple, but
That's okay.
wasn't
We
that simple?
got some history in there,
Yeah.
and we got some chemistry too. So burning fat instead of burning sugar for food. So in order to get your body into that state, what does a person need to do?
Good question. So most of us are burning sugar as a primary fuel source.
Mm-hmm.
Carbohydrate. We were told for decades that your brain runs on glucose. Your brain runs on sugar. You need carbohydrates to live, which is actually not true. But in order to get into a ketogenic state or to burn fat instead of sugar, you have to get the sugar out
Mm-hmm.
and increase your fat intake so your body has a fuel source of fat to start burning.
Mm-hmm.
It will also then start to burn your own stored fat. So whether you're burning your own fat or you're burning fat that's coming in through diet depends on the person, but most of us transition into a ketogenic diet by eating more fat, and then
Mm-hmm.
that can be changed, moderated a bit over time, depending
Okay.
on weight loss and all kinds of.
So I'm sure anyone who's looked into doing the ketogenic diet has seen figures like, oh, well, you have to eat only 20 to 50 grams of carbs, or certain ratios of carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic because I tend to disagree with some of the predominant thinking out there, which is that you really need to keep proteins moderate and don't overdo proteins because it's going to kick you out of ketosis. So there's this big emphasis on don't eat too much protein.
Mm-hmm.
You only want to eat a moderate amount, and of course don't eat too many carbs. That's true. Most people start like with under 50 grams of total carbohydrate. That's where I start people.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of slowly move them down, sometimes to down to 20 or 30 grams of total carbohydrate, as they get used to that way of eating. And so there's the macronutrient in terms of carbohydrate isn't that flexible. You really just want to lower it as much as possible. And some people do net carbs. I'm not really a fan of so net carbs are different than total carbs, because net carbs include fiber, or they take the fiber out, right? So you're not considering the fiber. And total carbs is just the totality of the carbohydrate. Net is like the carbohydrate minus the fiber. So when you're doing net carbs, you can inadvertently be eating actually more carb. And a lot of keto junk food calculates net carbs. So people get into this thing where they're like eating net carb keto bars all the time and stuff like that, which are
very tasty.
They are tasty. They can be very tasty. And for some people it's fine, actually, but for others, maybe who are trying to lose weight, particularly, it can be.
So what is the reason behind net carbs? I mean, so fiber is or is not converted into sugar the same way carbohydrates are. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's why we would subtract the fiber from a carbohydrate number.
Right. So the argument for not doing net carbs is really for people who are who need to lose weight, and maybe they even have a little bit of a sugar or food addiction, and they're using a lot of the processed keto bars and stuff.
Okay.
That are calculating net carbs, and they're not losing, and they're having issues, and they're, that's kind of a different, that's sort of a different realm than someone just trying to use keto for other reasons.
Okay.
So really I just do total carbs for most people.
So really in our country, we kind of have an epidemic of overweight people, and people, as you mentioned, metabolic syndrome.
Yeah.
So metabolic syndrome is kind of the gateway to diabetes.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk about, I know that you work with a lot of people on diabetes reversal, and also metabolic syndrome and the problems that creates. I think metabolic syndrome as a term is unfamiliar for many people. So if you could explain a bit about that, and glucose intolerance, I think it would be very helpful for people.
Yeah. So metabolic syndrome is like, of course, we hear these terms: syndrome, you have this syndrome, you have that syndrome, which basically means it's kind of a cluster of things. But metabolic syndrome specifically is high blood sugar, high blood pressure, abdominal obesity, high triglycerides, and low good cholesterol. So it's actually, there are 5 actual key things that determine it. But, it's a gut, if you're walking around with a gut, you've got a lot of abdominal obesity, you have high blood pressure, your cholesterol numbers don't look great, you've probably got metabolic syndrome. So it's just sort of like this catch-all term.
And what does that mean for your long-term health? What does that do to your body?
Well, it's very inflammatory. Your body can't, so I'll say this: metabolic syndrome is the cluster of things, and there's one underlying basic mechanism for metabolic syndrome. And that is when insulin is running too high and for too long all the time. So insulin as a hormone, and hormones like to come out, do their job, and leave. They don't like to hang out. Hormones, they're just like, doing my job, I'm leaving. When insulin is on being utilized, and the pancreas is having to create insulin all the time, multiple times throughout the day, all day long, you get into this hyperinsulinemic state where there's just too much insulin running all the time, and because there's too much sugar coming in,
Mm-hmm.
at a high frequency. It's all about high frequency, not necessarily that you eat sugar, but at the frequency at which you are.
Okay.
Sugar meaning, candy bars or rice or bananas or, so that's the underlying mechanism for metabolic syndrome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So when we switch our fuel source from sugar to fats, which produces ketones, we kind of get out of that loop, right? We get out of the burst of energy with the sugar, and then the crash, which is really typical of people who are hyperglycemic or even hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
And we kind of retrain our cells to actually be more reactive to insulin because they're not getting these big bursts. So when we are having all of this sugar coming into our bodies, our cells start saying, hey, this is too much.
Yeah.
And they become what's called insulin resistant. Yes?
Right.
So the insulin comes along and the cells say, hey, I don't need any more sugar. I am not going to respond to this stimulus of insulin. So just stay in the blood. And that is very inflammatory.
Yes.
So by switching this fuel source, by denying our body basically of all of the sugar, we don't get these big reactions of insulin, which under normal circumstances would bring the sugar into our cells as fuel.
Exactly.
So that's how we get out of that pattern.
Right. So, think like there's a nephrologist who runs a fasting clinic in Toronto, Canada, named Dr. Jason Fung, and he kind of makes the analogy of a stuffed suitcase. Like this, the sugar is just like is stuffed, like a suitcase is overpacked, and you just can't fit in anymore, and so you just have it floating around in the bloodstream, and insulin's like trying to do its job, but it's running so often that the body stops hearing it. The body starts to just, the cells stop listening. Because if it's running around all this, it's like a bad smell in a room. If you sit in the room all day, you don't smell that. You get nose blind to it. You're resistant to that smell. It's the same thing with
or most addictive drugs, right?
Yes.
Your body adapts. It needs more and more to get the same response. And
it's a normal adaptive mechanism actually to become insulin resistant when it's just overused. And so what we do with keto is, so your body only stores 600 grams of sugar, right? There's some in the liver and there's some in the muscles. And then it starts to overflow into the bloodstream. You get insulin resistant. You're gaining weight because your liver's turning sugar into fat, and that sugar is just floating around, and it's mucking up your immune system. It's maybe starts to damage your nerves. That's why diabetics get neuropathies. And so what we do in keto is we just deplete those the sugar coming in, and we deplete the sugar in the liver and the muscles as much as possible, so that when you deplete all that sugar that's stored and floating around and trying to go somewhere, then your body goes, oh, I don't have carbohydrate or sugar as a fuel source. I need to use fat. So it'll switch over and start using fat as a fuel source. So my argument, because I believe in this term called ancestral medicine or ancestral health, right? Is that our bodies are sort of designed to be in a fat burning state a lot of the time. Because when, carbohydrates were often more scarce or only certain times of the year.
Certainly. I mean, you think about seasonally, where are you going to find a banana in the winter in Wisconsin?
Right.
At the grocery store. Yeah. But, but nowhere else.
Right. it's like a mismatch. Like that's why they call diabetes a mismatch disease, because it's like our ancestral, these containers we walk around in, these bodies are ancestral containers living in a modern context,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're driven to carbohydrate as a fuel source because it was scarce and it was not readily available, and it's a quick fuel source.
And it's delicious,
And it's delicious.
right? And there's a reason it's delicious, because, and if we were in the wild, so to speak, and you found something sugary, it'd be like, oh, great, this is going to keep me going
Oh,
for,
absolutely.
you know, if you've been eating just meat and plants, and then you find a berry, it's like, wow,
Yeah,
that's a boost, right?
exactly. And a lot of carbohydrates, like summer fruits and stuff, happen because we're trying to pack on the pounds for winter.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's that
And
whole,
at which time we should naturally shift to a fat burning state, because all those carbohydrates been converted to fat eventually,
mhm,
and we start the cycle over again, right? Yeah,
exactly.
wonderful. So we've talked about, in my work, I work with people with concussion,
Mhm,
and a big part of concussion is brain inflammation.
mhm,
And we know that insulin, as well as cortisol, which is part of the whole sugar metabolism pathway, can inflame brain inflammation more. But I think it goes far beyond that. I'd like you to talk about some of the benefits. For one, you mentioned earlier that we've been told that glucose is the only fuel for our brain,
right.
which I think that was kind of the common knowledge for a long time, which actually is absolutely untrue.
Very untrue.
Ketones,
Mhm,
which are produced through this process of burning fat in the
mhm,
body, also are a very good fuel for the brain, even a better fuel for the brain. I'm
exactly.
wondering if you could talk a little bit about that for folks.
Yeah, so your liver, when you're fat burning, your liver will start to produce ketones, which is a source of energy. And so for the brain, you know, it's the brain becomes insulin resistant as well as the body. Like it's not this
Mm-hmm.
separate thing, right? So the brain, as we age, and I guess I'm talking it more of in an aging context rather than concussion, but they cross over for sure because it's all about brain health. But as we age, our brains, and if we've become insulin resistant or we have a high eating frequency of carbohydrate, that's we're getting insulin resistant of the brain. So if you can start getting into a ketogenic state and you're utilizing ketones for energy, your brain, that's like the glucose can't get in and do it and fuel the brain as much as it used to be able to. It kind of hits a ceiling. So if you can get into ketosis, it fills the gap.
Mm.
So the brain is starting to get the energy it needs by filling the gap that's happening, um, with ketones. And then they're just less, ketones are less, they produce less oxidative stress
Okay.
than glucose. So your
Which,
brain,
and oxidative stress is pro-inflammatory.
yeah,
So less oxidative stress means less inflammation.
exactly, which is always good for concussion
Right.
and the
Yeah.
brain.
So
Yeah.
also with concussion, we have kind of specialized cells in the brain. We've talked about this before,
Yeah.
the microglial cells,
Hmm.
which get stimulated, and ketones dampen that response.
Hmm.
They actually can shift those cells from a pro-inflammatory expression to an anti-inflammatory expression.
Hmm.
So same cell running on glucose, inflammatory, running on ketones,
Hmm.
anti-inflammatory.
Exactly.
So,
And I think it's, as shown through the effect that seizures um, that ketones have on seizures really
Hmm.
really speaks to that anti-inflammatory component through like the neurotransmission and the mitochondria. I really think ketones are better for mitochondrial health of the brain. Um,
Yes, I think so as well. Yeah.
yeah, and because I think that mitochondrial dysfunction can be part of seizures too.
Hmm.
So it's just our bodies naturally want to be in ketosis for part, at least part of the time.
Hmm.
And so our brains want that too. And we can heal our brains with this mechanism.
So while we're kind of a related topic, said if we're in ketosis for part of the time. So let's talk about another thing that's out there and people are seeing a lot of intermittent
Mm-hmm.
fasting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So when I first saw that phrase, I thought, oh man, I I am terrible at fasting.
Yeah.
I
Me
it's
too.
really hard for me to go without food, right? And I thought, oh, these fasts, you got like 2 or 3 days where you're drinking juice or you're eating grapefruit or whatever. No way, I'm never gonna do it.
Right.
Eat it. Um, Not gonna happen. So why don't you explain what intermittent fasting really is?
So yeah, I have had a similar response because I was the same way. I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like, I need to eat breakfast. I need to. Um, but that's when I was more of a sugar burner. But
Yeah, me too.
yeah, and then you realize that oh wow, I don't. Yeah, it's liberating to realize you don't have to do that. So intermittent fasting really it really means time restricted eating. So you're restricting your eating time to a certain window throughout the day, and that can look like many things. It could be a larger window. You could be eating 12 hours out of the day and fasting 12 hours of the day, or you can be eating, 8 hours of the day and fasting 16 hours a day. It kind of depends on where that person lands and what their lifestyle is. And I typically have people doing I call it accordion style because I haven't thought of a better name.
Hmm.
Like if something they like doing a 16-8, they're fasting for 16, eating for 8, their eating window is 11 to 7. Maybe on Sunday they have a larger eating window, or maybe they do a 24-hour fast and they only have one meal. I kind of like them to mix it up, like cross train their eating windows. But intermittent fasting is a way to get insulin low for part of the day, so you're
Hmm.
not running it all the time,
Hmm.
and that's going to lower inflammation. And interestingly, I just want to say really quick that I think it was the Journal of American Medical Association. I think I'll have to double check, but there was a recent study that came out that they had 60 participants, and because this is going to be in the news and people are probably going to start asking questions about this,
Okay.
that intermittent fasting doesn't work
Hmm.
in terms of weight loss. And they found that they put like part of the group on a regular diet, or actually they both ate the same. They didn't restrict their diets at all. They ate whatever they wanted to, but one group only ate between 12 noon and 8 p.m.
Hmm.
And they now and there was not a lot of difference between the two groups. So now everyone's saying intermittent fasting doesn't work. Intermittent fasting doesn't do anything. It's actually bad for you. But they don't talk about what they ate.
Right. Yeah.
So that
Which is
also
true.
matters.
So if they're eating candy bars for 8 hours, it's really not going to help them.
Right. So you're going to see people, oh, I heard that doesn't work. That this reputable journal said it doesn't work. But when we dive into what the study actually was, I have a lot of questions about that. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but
Okay. Yeah. A good tangent because yeah, people are going to. That's what people see. They see things in the media and it's like,
yeah.
oh well, I'm not going to do that. I mean, what's the point?
Or they say, I tried intermittent fasting, it didn't work for me, and now I know why. But
Mm.
really, when I talk to people who've tried intermittent fasting, there are a lot of reasons why it didn't work. And when we start to ask questions like, were did you change your diet at all? Did you lower carbs? Did you usually it's people who jump in and they haven't really gotten into fat burning yet.
Right. So that was actually my next question.
Yeah.
So during intermittent fasting, one of the things that happens is you start producing a lot of ketones because you're not getting any carbohydrates. You're not getting anything. So you have to burn something. You burn whatever fat you have, and you produce ketones. So there's all the benefits of that. But if you have not been doing, and I've heard different sides of this, right? So if you have not been doing a ketogenic diet, well, first of all, it takes a couple days for your body to shift from being able to use carbohydrates into using ketones for fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't already made that shift, which they call being fat adapted,
Mm-hmm.
you're now using fat as your fuel source, which turns into ketones, which is the gas that runs the engine now. If you haven't become fat adapted, then you might crash if you try to do intermittent fasting, because you're producing the ketones, but your body doesn't know how to use it for energy.
Right. Yeah. And often people will crash because they, their body is making that shift. So they're in that, like, they call it the macronutrient dead zone, where they're like, they're not quite there. So they may feel hungry, they may feel cranky, they may have like keto flu. So there's ways around that, like using electrolytes, using I call it fat fasting. So I'll have people use NCT oil or bulletproof coffee or something in the morning to tide them over until their eating window. So that's not true fasting, but you're still low insulin because you're just ingesting fat only. And that'll tide them over. And then after a week or two, we cut out the morning fat source.
So when you talk about intermittent fasting, are you talking about doing that every day or 3 times a week, or just varies for people?
It varies for people. Like if you have 150 pounds to lose, I'm talking every day, and we may even do 24-hour fast and maybe even a 3-day fast thrown in. But if you're lean and you're just doing it for, you're doing it more for brain health, and you don't need to lose weight or anything like that, then you can stick with fat fasting, or you can do larger windows, or you can mix it up,
So if you're doing it for brain health, you're probably going to be doing the keto diet to begin with.
Right.
So what is the additional value of the fasting?
That's a great question. So probably the autophagy, or the cellular, like the body, when it goes through periods of time of not eating, it just cleans house. Your body's like, oh, there's no energy to process, so I'm going to start cleaning up these cells, and I'm going to start taking out the garbage. And there's a lot to talk around when that starts happening, right? Like it starts happening at 16 hours, or it starts happening at 24. I think the consensus is like it starts happening at 16 hours.
I've heard different numbers, but yeah, 16 hours seems to be the time that people look at, especially for things like tau proteins. So tau proteins are kind of the gook that gets in between your cells in the brain that are associated with Alzheimer's.
Right.
So there's been talk of reversing Alzheimer's with the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
To clear some of that stuff out. And as far as concussion goes, I really like to recommend it, because concussion kind of sets you up for brain degeneration, all the inflammation that takes place. So to be on a proactive side and clear things out before they really become a problem, why not? I believe in prevention. So I see that definitely as one of the extra benefits of the intermittent fasting, as difficult as it may be for some people.
For some people, yeah. Although I think once fat adapted, I don't know, what do you think? Once fat adapted, most people do pretty well with some
well, my own personal experience has been that it's okay. It's not bad. And I think I was really afraid to do it because before I tried the ketogenic diet, I was in that group of insulin resistance, where if I did not eat very regularly, I would crash. I would get super
Yeah.
cranky and tired, and then I would eat and have this nice big spike of carbohydrates and sugar in my body, and I'd need to take a nap.
I know. I was just gonna ask you. Then you got tired, didn't you? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a lot of people out there like that. And even though, I mean, I actually celebrated my 1 year anniversary of doing the ketogenic diet on Tuesday.
Wow.
Yeah, not that I haven't cheated here and there, but
Right. Yeah.
but yeah, it's been a year since I've been working on it, and it's taken me that long to kind of wrap my head around the idea that, yeah, I can actually go without breakfast
Yeah.
and not be completely brain dead by noon.
Right.
So yeah, it's
So
an interesting shift.
it is, and I know a lot of people are. I was afraid of that too, because I was like, I get hungry every 2 to 3 hours. No way. I'll be like, my symptoms were nausea and like just kind of brain fog. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like, that's that glucose coming down, and then the liver and the body's all, oh, where's the sugar? Where's the sugar? Because it hasn't. So then it releases cortisol, and then you get like that stress response. You may even get sweaty or palpitations. I would get nauseous and just, you don't feel good. But when you switch to fat burning, you know, your liver, your body's just like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
It's more smooth. So you're not getting the cortisol ups and downs like you previously were, if you're doing it right, you know?
Yeah, it's basically adrenaline, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're going into fight or flight mode.
Yeah. It's stressful.
Very
So
stressful.
there is a fear, because we've had 30 years of eat 6 meals a day, you eat your healthy whole grains, eat your bananas. You know, we've had decades of programming around that. So people do have anxieties about transitioning to a different, like more ancestral way of living.
All
So
right. Well, those are all the questions that I wanted to. Actually, there's one more question. So something that some people, including something that I was concerned about when I started the ketogenic diet, if
mhm,
you're getting 70% of your calories from fat,
mhm.
um, where's all this fat going? And how does it affect your cardiovascular system?
Right. So the fat's being shuttled around the body and being used for energy. Okay. So, you know, it depends on the person, but if you're lean, like you're lean, I'm lean. I didn't used to be lean, but with the ketogenic diet, I've gotten a lot leaner. Your body's going to be shuttling around fats in your bloodstream through LDL, your cholesterol particles.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get higher cholesterol on keto, but it's all in context. But does it mean the quality of the fat is really what you want to worry about in terms of inflammation, I think, and cardiovascular risk.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like your brain doesn't want to be exposed to inflammation and oxidation. Your vessels don't really want to either. So if you have janky fats running around your vessels,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like a lot of polyunsaturated fats, like seed oils, industrial oils that you're eating through processed foods or cooking with
Mm-hmm.
canola or whatever, then I think you're at a higher risk. And if you add sugar to those unstable fats, then you've got a lot of inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not keto, because you're getting the sugar out with keto. But you could definitely do keto in a way that's like not healthy, depending on how you source your fats and
So
stuff.
what I hear you saying is that your cholesterol levels may go up on the
Yeah.
ketogenic diet, but maybe it is not a cause for alarm.
Maybe it is not a cause for alarm. There's a lot of controversy around this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I hear physicians say ketogenic diet raises cholesterol. You can't stay on it long term. But I mean, I've seen people who aren't even really doing keto. They're just doing a lot of intermittent fasting and their cholesterol goes up because they're losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and their body, as they lose weight, is just using more fat for fuel. So I think there's a big gray area, but there's a lot of talk now around the mechanism of cholesterol, why it goes up in keto. And some
Mm-hmm.
people, like, there's a guy named Dave Feldman who's an engineer, and he's done a lot of research on this. He calls it, especially for people who are lean, he calls them lean mass hyperresponders. Where they do a ketogenic or low carb, high fat diet, they tend to be lean and they have high cholesterol, high LDL, but they tend to have low triglycerides and high HDL. So he says that your body fat is low, so you don't that tank is low.
Mm-hmm.
Your sugar stores are low, so you've got two fuel sources that are low. And so you're taking in fat through your diet, and your body is using the LDL to as you know to transport the fat for fuel within your body, because that's the context that your body is in.
Mm-hmm.
And so people's LDL will go way up, and so, but you'll typically again see low triglycerides and high good cholesterol. And
Mm.
so his theory is sort of like, should we worry about this? It seems like a normal adaptation. Why would your body want to kill you? But it can be misinterpreted, and then there's also truth to high cholesterol being a bad thing. So it's very complicated,
Mm-hmm.
but it's good to get like a fractionated lipid panel to kind of get a real look at what's going on.
So fractionated tells you all the different kinds of LDL and
Yeah.
HDL that you have,
Yeah.
and you can kind of see what's good, what's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of just looking at the basic numbers, it'll kind of dive in and give you the subcategories, which matter. The subcategories of LDL matter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've actually done a pretty good job
You have.
of looking at a topic that there's a lot of confusion around. There's a lot of misconceptions around. I hope we've made it more accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys have questions, Dr. Amy, why don't you provide your contact information for everyone? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's Dr. Amy Schaus, and I'm in San Rafael, California. I also do telemedicine. And you can find me at NorCal Integrative Medicine, NorCalIntegrativeMedicine.com. All my contact information is there.
Great. And I'm Dr. Jonathan Smith. I'm a doctor of chiropractic. I have a specialty in helping people recover from concussion. I'm also in San Rafael. My website is BalanceDC. That's balancedavidcharlie.com. It's been a pleasure, and let's talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.